Conscious Media. Welcome to Independent Americans. Welcome to episode 328. I'm your host, Paul Reichoff. And welcome to almost spring in New York, where it's still only about 40 degrees. But the flowers are out, the sun is shining. We're going to go for a walk and try this again for a second episode in a row, because not only is Trump destroying our economy and destroying our global alliances, he's also destroying our national security. So even though the cherry blossoms are starting to bloom and the sun is trying to come out, now is especially still a time to stay vigilant. So we're going to start again walking downtown and make our way north toward the World Trade Center, as I break down for you the most important, the most urgent, and some of the most underreported issues in politics and national security. How are you and where are you? As for me, I am in downtown Lower Manhattan, walking north along the West Side Highway with the Statue of Liberty behind me, the World Trade Center ahead of me, now self-proclaimed independent Eric Adams somewhere north of me, and the flowers are fighting to get out through the cold, through the wind, through the adversity. It's kind of what it feels like for all of us in America right now. And coming up, I'm going to have an amazing conversation with a different kind of fighter. Maverick Republican Congressman Don Bacon. He's a former Air Force general who's been bucking Donald Trump and his party on Ukraine, on tariffs, and more. And we're going to talk about all those issues, whether he's going to stay a Republican, and how he feels about Dan Osborn, the independent in Nebraska, who says he might be running again. All that coming up as we walk north. And as the sun comes in and out, which is kind of what it feels like in America these days. You get a blip of sun and then some more cold. But first, let's kick it off in the midst of all the noise and the chaos with my top topics. The birds are chirping, the sun is out, and the markets are in ruin. But don't get distracted by all the economic catastrophes, because there are still national security catastrophes that we need to keep our eyes on. None more important than Trump's purge that continues at the Pentagon, which this week included the purge of General Hawk, the head of not just the NSA, but Cyber Command. And this was announced not by the Pentagon Press Affairs Office, not by the White House press secretary. It was announced by radical 9/11 conspiracist and all-around dangerous crazy person, Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer said 9/11 was an inside job. Well, this is where 9/11 happened. It was not an inside job. I was there. And the fact that Laura Loomer is anywhere near our president, our White House, or our national security is an absolute and total travesty, embarrassment, and dangerous national security risk that should be unacceptable to all Americans. And maybe most troubling of all, the Pentagon, Secretary Hegseth, the president, they didn't even explain the firings, which are obviously because General Hawk didn't pass some kind of purity litmus test. No. They let Laura Loomer, the radical 9/11 conspiracy theorist, announce it on her Twitter page. It appears that she is influencing Trump's decisions on national security, which should have us all alarmed and all outraged. As I continue to walk north past the site of one of the biggest national security disasters in American history, we should be reminded that the Pentagon still doesn't do regular press conferences. They're not making Secretary Hegseth available to questions. They're not putting Laura Loomer out of the Pentagon. So they continue to stonewall as the military purge continues, as one of only 11 four-star generals is fired. Our troops, our military families, our veterans, and our first responders are getting no answers from the Pentagon. And that should have us all outraged. And you know, we never got a parade for our 9/11 first responders. We never got a parade for the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. Most wars had a parade just over there to my east, through the Canyon of Heroes, up Broadway, the old ticker tape style parade. Not just for World Series champions, but they used to do them at the end of wars. They haven't done one for our generation. Not, frankly, that we need a parade. But what's maybe most alarming is that it seems Trump is going to do a parade for himself. Trump is now trying what he tried in the last term. He's trying to create a military parade in his own honor on his birthday, June 14th. It happens to be the 250th anniversary of the Army, but it's also Trump's birthday. And Trump, again, is trying to have a Kim Jong-un North Korean-style birthday military parade celebration. It might sound like a silly thing, but it's really not. It's something that should concern everybody. Because as Trump continues to blur the line between our national security and our politics, that puts everyone at risk. Well, I hope this crazy military parade idea gets more media attention. It definitely should. But there's some other issues that aren't getting nearly enough attention. As the spring thaw continues, March Madness wraps up, and we move through another chaotic week, there are some issues that you need to keep track of. And watch out for traffic when you're crossing the West Side Highway. Yep, talking about my issues that are below the radar. So as we continue our walk, we're now just south of the World Trade Center Memorial. This is the exact spot where the Twin Towers fell, where the rescue effort ensued, and where I was on 9/11 like many others. Off to my left is the glades that now memorializes the folks who've been lost since 9/11, the first responders. And as so many in Washington continue to talk about how much they care about our troops, our veterans, and our national security, remember, too many have not committed to supporting the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund and ensuring that it's funded for the years to come. So think about how many of them were standing here back on 9/11. And now, decades later, they like to post on 9/11 that they never forget. But we know the truth. Too many of them forget. That's why we've got to hold them accountable and don't let them slip away. That's why we've got to continue to keep the focus, continue to stay vigilant, and ensure that they truly never forget. The fate of our 9/11 first responders continues to stay below the radar as our friends continue to die almost every single day. Firefighters, cops, others who stepped up when others stepped back. That happened here. And what's happening now in Washington is cowardice. But the politicization of our national security continues, just like the politicization of just about everything else, including sports, which brings us to one of our favorite villains in Washington and someone who makes me resurrect our asshole of the week every couple of weeks. Our old friend, Senator Redneck, is back saying some new outrageous, ridiculous, and hacky shit. Check this out.
Men's teams across this country now that are turning trans.
Yeah.
Women's teams, they're turning trans. And that's going to be a situation where it's going to pick up speed because these woke globalists are pushing these kids to say, if you can't compete in men's sports, let's just transition and say you're a woman and participate in women's sports. It is dead wrong, and we've got to stand up against it. But the Democrats, they're all in of keeping this situation going in the wrong direction.
So this is the same guy who put holds on our military promotions last year because he didn't agree with abortion policies. I have a question for Senator Redneck. Tell me one team where this is the case. Just one team in all of America where this is the case. He can't name one. That's why he remains the most partisan, the most extreme, and the hackiest, and probably the dumbest single member of the Senate. Behind me now is the famous engine company, Ladder Company 10, which is just a few feet from the site of Ground Zero, a place of heroism, a place where firefighters ran in when others were going out. And now it's a living testimony to their courage and to their heroism. But as we should always stop to remember their heroism and their courage, we should also remember that every single day in America right now, veterans are being fired by the thousands. And the purge continues not just at the Department of Defense, but also at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where morale continues to plummet. I talk to folks throughout the VA system all around the country, many vets who've served for decades, and they are right now demoralized, they are unsettled, and they are unsupported. Because every single day, as they heroically work to help other veterans, they don't know if the Musk and Doge guillotine is going to drop on them. So it looks like we're still looking at least 83,000 firings at the VA in the next couple of months. And 1 in every 3 federal worker who's been fired is a veteran too. But I continue to emphasize that these veterans who are being purged are the patriotic leaders we need. If you're one of them and you've recently been purged or you want to support others who have, check out independentveteransofamerica.org, where we are recruiting veterans to run for office this year and next year at the local level, from school board all the way to U.S. Senate. Over 300 veterans have told us they're interested in running. If you're one of them or you want to support them, check out independentveteransofamerica.org now. We're going to need more independent leaders because we know that this president and his party are not going to save us, and the Democrats sure as hell aren't going to save us. They can't seem to stop anything, and they're contaminating their brand more and more by the day, especially thanks to people that still associate with them, like New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Mayor Eric Adams, who recently declared that he's running as an independent, even though he's not going to leave the Democratic Party, showed up at a press conference wearing this T-shirt, saying that God has helped him through these tough times. Well, here's an important message for Mayor Adams. The people of New York City don't support you and won't vote for you. Independents in the city don't support you and won't vote for you. And even God probably won't support you and vote for you. So give it up and let it go. The sooner you go away and stay away from independence and New York City, the better. There's also some good news regarding independence that maybe was below your radar too. Independent Navy vet and former Senate candidate from Nebraska, Dan Osborn, said this week he is considering running for office again, this time against the other Republican senator, Pete Ricketts, who's a billionaire who owns the Chicago Cubs. Draft Dan, folks. We were all inspired by what Dan Osborn did in his race last year against Deb Fischer. Now, he's got a chance to run against a billionaire, to again run against the Republican Party, maybe run against a Democrat too, and inspire a country. Dan Osborn represents the kind of independent leadership that we need right now. Dan Osborn is, of course, from Nebraska, and so is our guest in this episode. It's a guy I've been hoping to get on the show for a couple of years now, and I finally got him at the perfect time. He's a maverick in the spirit of John McCain, a guy who's willing to fight his own party, is willing to stand on his values, and he's willing to fight for what he believes in. And in this episode, he's going to break it down. He's a former Air Force general who ran as a Republican and won a district that went to the Democrats the last 2 presidential races. He's a guy who's willing to speak from his heart and stand on his values. I'm going to ask him about Ukraine and his strong stand there, and tariffs, and so many other issues. I'm going to ask him about all the fights he's in with Trump, who's from his own party. We're going to talk about tariffs. We're going to talk about Ukraine and a variety of other issues where he is bucking Trump and bucking his party. I'm going to ask him also what he thinks about Dan Osborn in his home state of Nebraska, and if maybe he'll actually leave the Republican Party and maybe even one day run for president. Representative Don Bacon is in the middle of all of it, and he's taking fire from all sides, which means he's the perfect person to talk to on this show. America's looking for leaders. In this episode, we're going to talk to him. Welcome to a time in America where people are looking for leaders to rise up and meet the moment, just like so many did on this sacred spot on 9/11. Welcome to a time and a moment we'll all never forget. Welcome to Independent Americans, episode 328. Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country, around the world, and especially in Nebraska, we have a very timely, important, courageous guest that I have been eager to have on this show for a long time, who is right smack in the middle of all the issues we've been covering and are at the inflection point for so many Americans. I am very happy, proud, and honored to have finally joining us on Independent Americans, the great and powerful Representative Don Bacon from the great state of Nebraska. Welcome, sir.
I think you overstate my status, but I appreciate it. Thank you. It's good to be on with you.
Well, maybe not this week. You're a veteran, so you're used to being in the middle of all of it. But you are right now smack dab in the middle of some of the most important issues, and I think bringing a really independent voice. That's why I'm so excited to have you here right now. Want to get into Ukraine, tariffs, national security, Nebraska. But you're a grandpa. You're a grandpa. You've been a combat leader. You've led people in combat. This is a very trying time for folks, especially as we wake up to the markets continuing to be in flux. How are you, sir, and where are you? We ask that of every guest, but where are you right now, and how are you?
Well, I'm in Papillion, which is a suburb of Omaha, and this is where we settled down after I retired in 2014 out of the Air Force after 3 decades in the Air Force. I had 3 assignments at Offutt Air Force Base, so this became home over time. And getting ready to head back to D.C., unfortunately, and we'll be there through Thursday. It's a lot going on there with tax policy is the big thing right now in the House itself, and trying to figure out how much cuts we got to make the tax to extend the taxes. So that's going to be the big debate this week. And of course, we got trade going on. But I'm in my home, and this is the home I hope to stay in until I'm 95 years old, or however long God gives me on this earth. And I love being home.
And at times like this, sir, you're obviously leading the people of your district, but you're also leading your family. And a lot of folks are concerned, worried. There's just a lot of chaos and mayhem. What's your message to those folks, both in your district and maybe even more importantly to your kids and your grandkids who maybe have some anxiety or wondering what's next? They look to you for your steady leadership. What's your message to them?
As you mentioned, I'm a dad of 4 kids. 3 are married. We have 8 grandkids. All the grandkids live within about 10 minutes of our house, so that's very convenient. And I saw them Saturday and I saw them Sunday, right? Mm-hmm. My main message is keep your faith in God first. Because I think if you don't have a faith in the Almighty, and I believe in the Bible, I have a lot more anxieties. Like, I think the economy is very unstable right now. We've had $6 trillion lost in the stock market, not counting what's going on today yet. I know people in Nebraska are losing their market access to Europe right now. So there is a lot of fear out there, and our politics are all jumbled. It's crazy. I could write a book on Democrats sound like Republicans today, Republicans sound like Democrats today, and it's crazy. And I haven't changed. I'm a Ronald Reagan guy. I was a Ronald Reagan supporter in 1976 when I was 13 years old, and I've been sort of the same guy ever since on that. But if I didn't have a faith in God, I would be worried. I know I have an eternity with Him. I know we're ultimately in His hands. Sometimes bad things occur, but God makes all things turn out for the good for those who love Him and follow Him, and that's where I have to keep my faith right there.
I think a lot of us are sharing your prayers and hopes and faith, and also feel that deep concern, especially because the politics are so divided. And you are kind of an old school Nebraskan representative. We've talked a lot about Nebraska on this show and the bicameral and how it represents maybe a model in many ways for how independents especially can be better represented in our elected government. But it feels like the Democrats are crazy and the Republicans are crazy, and there aren't too many voices in the middle. But you sit in that middle spot. You get a lot of friction for it, but you're not afraid to go against your own party. You're not afraid to be out in front alone. And you're doing that right now on tariffs. So I want to start with that if we can. The market's had 3 at least terrible days, catastrophic days. The tariffs have kind of blown apart everything and create a lot of chaos and anxiety. And you stepped out in front and said you're going to introduce legislation to give the power back to Congress. Can you talk about what your plan is here and why you're doing it?
It's really Senator Grassley's bill in the Senate. And him and I align a lot, and not by design. I talk to him once or twice a year, but on a lot of issues, I'm sort of a Grassley Republican as well. In fact, he got elected when I was a freshman in college. And I'll never forget it. My professor was crying about it. I never forgot that. But the Article 1 in the Constitution makes it clear that Congress has the power of the purse, power to tax, power to do tariffs. And what Congress has done, going back about a century ago, they gave emergency powers to the president. I don't think emergency powers is what is going on right now. I mean, I see an emergency as Russia invading Ukraine. Let's put tariffs on Russia. Or China's invading Taiwan. Let's put tariffs on China. But what we're doing right now is we're developing a whole tariff policy, and we're laying a global 10% tariff out there. Plus, we're targeting some countries at an extraordinarily high rate. We could talk about that later. But this is a policy, not an emergency tariff. And I think we should regain this power, this authority that the Constitution gave us. And what it simply says is if the president wants to do a tariff, he has to get approval from Congress. And that's part of our taxing and our tariff authorities the Constitution gives us. I know it rubs some people terribly wrong, and I just say, hey, it's the Constitution. And these same people call themselves constitutionalists, but they're really not. They're about, I don't know, they're following one person blindly, if you ask me. And it's sometimes it takes people like us to stand up and get a policy in the right direction. I'm not opposed to all tariffs. I think there's some countries out there that block our goods and make it hard for us to sell our agriculture products there. And there should be negotiations, and tariff may be a part of that. But a global tariff and a global war right now. So this is a war, a tariff war. And it's the world against America right now. I don't think that's too smart. I don't think that's what Americans wanted last November. And I think it's going to be very hard for us to come out on top of this. We'll get some wins, but there may be a lot more losses in this war, this global tariff war that we're in right now.
Sir, you're a strategist, and you're, an uncommon voice of reason in Washington right now. Folks who are listening to you maybe for the first time are saying, I haven't heard enough from this guy who sounds like he's making sense. Nebraska has a long history of Republicans and Democrats who are veterans who make sense, right? Guys like Chuck Hagel, Bob Kerrey, they've been on this show before and talked to our community. You're up against kind of everybody here. It's the John McCain strategy, right? So you're going into Congress and largely going to be taking on your own party, especially in the House. How do you actually get it done? Like, you're planting the flag, you and Grassley are gonna hold that spot, but how do you get consensus here? Or do you wait for the popular opinion to come to you as the market continues to implode? Right. And are there other strategies you can implode? I mean, you can imply if he just blows past it and doesn't care what you all do.
Well, I do believe the Senate is closer to passing this right now. They have 7 Republicans already on this legislation, and all they need is get a 60 total. And I think the more you see things unravel on the stock market, and I think you're going to see unemployment and inflation take some hits on this, because tariffs are inflationary, right? And especially, it was one thing when President Trump did this, focus on one country like China, that you can mitigate that. But when it's a global thing, there's a likelihood we're going to see some other economic indicators not go the right direction. I hope not. I wish the best for our country. But I think the Senate can pass this first, and then as you see the economic indicators go one way or the other way, this is going to be a more viable option, possibly in 1 month, 2 months in the House. If people say, hey, this isn't working. And I got to tell you, Republicans haven't been a tariff party since 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Act. And as you know, that put us into a massive depression, and we lost Congress for about 6 decades. And we became then a free market party. And I think it should be a fair trade, but ultimately we want free trade, because we know this gives us the best products, the best price, and the most efficient manner possible. That's what free trade does. But it's got to be fair. So I'm not against all tariffs, but I don't believe in this war on everybody approach. It should be a little more targeted. I think we should focus on China. China is a predatory economic country that is not fair with American industries, right? So I'm not totally keep your hands off all this. I don't think that works either. But I think we should target a few countries that have been not fair to us. And with the EU, there are allies in NATO. I think we should be in discussions with them. They don't have tariffs on our products for the most part, maybe small tariffs, but they have all these rules that block our beef, our corn, and they're trying to protect their farmers while they're selling us their Scotch, their BMWs, and you name it. So I think there should be some discussions. It should be fair, but I don't think we have to go into a trade war with them right out of the chute. Let's sit down with them. I talk to these countries a lot. They know that they got to right size the ship for what they're doing. They know they're not being fair. So I think there's lucrative ground to work with the EU, for example. So I am a strategist. Take things one at a time.
Well, let's talk about a different kind of war that you have also been out in front on, I think, importantly and in a principled way. You said you're a Reagan Republican. I think Ronald Reagan would lose his mind if he saw the Republican Party stance on Ukraine right now, where we're abandoning our allies. We've had an opportunity to take away significant percentage of the Russian forces without losing any American lives. Our international community is now, lined more and more against us, and America feels more isolated. We've talked on this show to a lot of people inside Ukraine, advocates for Ukraine from all backgrounds. But you seem to be maybe the most important voice in the Republican Party right now, and one of the most important voices in America right now in support of Ukraine. You've been steady. You're catching a lot of flack for it. Can you talk about what you think happens next? We talk a lot about what's happening now, but what happens next, and where do you want to hold the line and ensure whatever kind of support you can for Ukraine in this fight for freedom?
Obviously, we want the war to end, but it's got to be a just peace. And so, on one hand, I applaud the president. It's good to negotiate, but we got to realize we're negotiating with a bad person, a bad character, not a good faith negotiating person in Putin. And all I've wanted really from the White House on this and the negotiations is moral clarity. It was Putin who did the start of this war. He's the invader. He's bombing cities. He kidnapped 19,000 Ukrainian kids. He's murdered POWs. I could go on and on. We should have clarity. Who is the bad guy or who is the invader? And Ukraine is the innocent victim. And there's a lot of propaganda out there. I've studied Russia since I was 18, and I was an intelligence guy for a good chunk of my Air Force career. So Ukrainians, they want to be part of the West. They want to have a free market country. They want rule of law. They want to be on our side of things. And Russia cannot stand the thought of that because another Slavic country embracing democracy is a threat to Putin because he thinks, okay, the Russian people will expect this next. So it's our national security interest that Ukraine remain free and part of the West. So that's the bottom line. And how does this happen next? I believe that Putin will try to string out negotiations while he's bombing cities. He's trying to grind Ukraine down. And I think we have to realize that he's not into a real serious negotiation. So that means we got to give Ukraine all the weapons we possibly can, and also keep pushing EU to do the same in other countries. We can't bear this cost alone. And they need good weapons that can hit targets at 200 miles away. Like if you can hit a mailbox 200 miles away, that's scary when you're a Russian. And but we need to be going after Russia economically, trying to squeeze them. They have $300 billion or so in assets out in the West. I think we should take it and give it to Ukraine. This is Russia's war, and we should do everything we can to help. Everything up to putting troops in Ukraine. I'm not advocating for that, but we can do a lot to help Ukraine prevail. And in the end, we got to break Putin's will. That's what Clausewitz talks about, right? We got to break his will, and you do it by making the cost too high.
Sir, you're saying all the right things, and I think reasonable, patriotic, nonpartisan things, but it's consistently not where the president is. And, it's exacerbated by some of his recent national security decisions, most recently firing General Hawk, right? Without any explanation from the Pentagon. We didn't get a formal explanation from Secretary Hegseth or anyone else. I think Hawk is one of 11 four-stars in the entire military. He's out, and we get a statement instead from Laura Loomer, the radical conspiracy theorist. I'm a 9/11 first responder myself. I'm talking to you right now, a couple blocks from ground zero where I was on 9/11. To me, it's obscene that she's even near the White House and near the president, much less speaking on behalf of him, which is what
Right.
it seems like it is right now. Can you break down what happens here? Because it's coming on the back of Signalgate. We know there's now an IG report investigation happening at the Pentagon. And maybe most importantly, what can be done about it? He's fired Hawk. We don't have any clarity. That's NSA and cyber. And it feels like more chaos around our national security at a time when we can't afford it.
So the president and his team have said very little about the firing of General Hawk, who, by the way, is a friend of mine. We served together. I was a one-star when he was a colonel. We served on the same team. And it was very impressive. You could tell he was going places there. But it appears, I think the reporting's accurate, though the president has not said this is the case. But you can read it. We had the conspiracist Loomer come into the White House and made a case for against 5 or 6 people in the White House, and then also General Hawk, also the number 2 person at NSA, and inferred that they were traitors because they were hired or put in those positions by General Milley. And which infers everybody that got any job under General Milley is also under that shadow, and that's just not fair. I know General Hawk. There's nobody more qualified and ready to lead NSA and Cyber Command than he. He did it for 34 years. He served at the signals intelligence level as lieutenant and in cyber operations as a company grade officer, and he worked those jobs from the time he was a second lieutenant to the time he was a 4-star general. And so nobody was more prepared to handle NSA and Cyber Command than him. And then they fired the number 2 guy at NSA, or lady. It put us back. He just attacked or got rid of two of the capable leaders we had. I got to tell you who's happy with that. It's Russia and China. And a lot of people don't understand why I just don't shut up and accept this, but it's unacceptable to have someone like Loomer come into the White House and the next day 6 people get fired, right? Because she says they're traitors. Cheryl Hawk is not a traitor. He's a patriot. He is 10 times the person that she is. And I'm just so disappointed in that decision. But I think the president needs to know there's people in the party that are not going to be just an echo chamber, that we carry a moral compass. In the end, I'm not about being a follower first or a party guy first. I'm a Christian first, an American second. I'm going to carry this compass and try to do the right thing. Now, good people can disagree at times. I get that. But I think I had to speak up on this because what happened was wrong. And I think it hurt us. I'm the cyber subcommittee chairman under the Armed Services Committee. I know the price that we just paid for that decision. And now we're going to be rudderless for months when it comes to cyber policy. It's a shame.
Sir, it's a shame that more Republicans don't sound like you, but the party seems to be more and more radical. The president seems to be more and more radical. And maybe to put a pin on it that you focus on, lacking moral clarity. The opposite. Some of the way he presents himself, the decisions he makes seem the opposite of moral clarity. So, this is independent Americans. We see more and more Americans declaring their independence from the two-party structure every single day, especially in a place like Nebraska. Is there a point where he crosses enough lines of your personal moral clarity where you'll leave the Republican Party?
One of the reasons I am a Republican is some of the social issues. I'm a pro-life person, and I think the Democrat Party has gone so crazy on those, and I won't belabor point by point, but they went off the rails the last 4 years. And I think that's one of the reasons why this election, when you talk about sports and things like that, and some of the stuff defies common sense. I was a Republican since Reagan ran in 1976. And I plan on being that kind of Republican. And maybe there's a time that maybe you don't have to vote for somebody. You can leave it blank. And I don't mind. And I voted for 1 or 2 Democrats down ballot. I still got to go case by case, right? And vote your conscience. But I want to be an advocate for the values that I think worked: peace through strength, standing up to bullies, federalism, keeping power at the local level, keeping our taxes as reasonable as we can. I come from the pro-life party, and that's who I am. I'm always going to be that way as long as God gives me time to live. But there's 2 things I'd like to bring up that I find interesting, and you're touching on it. One, I read a lot of books about the Judeo-Christian ethic that we as Americans had, and now there's some books that are talking about how we're in the post-truth society. And if you read some of these books, like one from Rabbi Sachs, he's from Great Britain. He passed away a couple of years ago. A post-truth society, it's more important to win than to be doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And you see that in our politics today. It's about winning. It's about following your leader. It's not about being right issue by issue. Secondly, if you look at the Republican Party right now, we sound very much like the 1930s Republican Party. Isolationist, anti-Europe. Tariffs were a big thing. That's how we got, part of the reason we got into the Depression. And it didn't work. The 1930s Republican Party, financial security, foreign affairs, tariffs, it backfired. And we then became the party over time of Eisenhower and Reagan. That worked. Mm-hmm. And what I'm hearing from Democrats today, like I've talked to some of them, we need to strengthen our military, got to stand up to Russia, tariffs are bad. And I go, daggone it, you sound just like Reagan. What happened here? We've had just a conflation between the 2 wings of our party. And a lot of our wings now, they come together and they vote the same way. Mm-hmm. AOC often votes with the far right for different reasons, but their no's or yeses are the same. And I think there's whole books out here ready to be written on this political shifting of the winds here. And I've sort of been watching it, but I'm watching it as a Reagan, Goldwater, McCain, Eisenhower guy.
Yeah, you sound like a politically homeless guy. Like so many other Americans, when I hear you talk, I say what I think a lot of folks say about, I wish you were independent, right? And we see a place like Nebraska, where I've had this conversation with Chuck Hagel. I've talked to Adam
Right.
Kinzinger and others, and I say, why are you still a Republican when it feels like the party has left you and crossed those moral lines? But in
Even if you're
Nebraska,
even
sorry,
if you're
yeah, go ahead.
even if you're independent, you still got to caucus with one side or the other.
Yeah, so let me ask you that if
So
I
it's hard
can.
on that.
Because Nebraska is really interesting, right? We saw Dan Osborn, who we had on this show, who captured a lot of energy, a lot of attention, ran as an independent. He's a Navy veteran, which I think was an important factor, a working class person. Now he said he may run against Pete Ricketts, who is a Republican, who's a billionaire, who's never served in the military. Maybe there's an opportunity for him to put up a fight again, similar to what he did with Deb Fischer. Do you have any, immediate reactions to that, to
Yeah.
Dan Osborn against Ricketts, and what's your take on how that could pan out?
Pete, on a lot of these issues, agrees with me. He's less vocal, maybe because he's got the Western Nebraska, but I find him he very much to be a Reagan type Republican as well, and he's tough. He's going to be he's a sequoia out there, but politically. So I would not underestimate Pete Ricketts in this, and he's very smart guy. I mean, yeah, you're right. He's come from a family of the Ameritrade, but I've watched him. I've gotten to know him now for 11 years. That guy works 15, 16 hours a day. He's very disciplined. He works out. I wish I did more of that. Uh, nobody's invincible, but he's going to be a very tough candidate for Mr. Osborn. And I know him too. I knew him when he was the union leader here at the Kellogg's plant when they were on strike. So I got to know him.
What do you make of Osborn? I mean, we've talked about also, we've had Nick Batter on this show, some other down ballot folks who
Right.
run as independents. Nick Batter, got beat by a Democrat by just 100 votes, I think.
Yeah.
There feels like there's a special sauce happening in Nebraska, and structurally it's built for independence. But can you talk about, what's your takeaway from Dan Osborn, who became the
Right.
most, noteworthy independent in America, and I think has inspired other independent veterans to run against Republicans and Democrats? What's your takeaway from his race last year?
By the way, let me just back up a little. Nick Batter is a sharp. I mean, he's got a tremendous story. I mean, I became a fan listening to him and knowing his story out there. And I think, and there is at the state level in unicameral, it's a unicameral, right?
Yep.
You can be an independent and flourish. I just think when you get at the federal level, you're either going to caucus for Republican or Democrat. And that's one thing that, Mr. Osborn could never really answer. Who are you going to caucus with? Because if you don't caucus with anybody, you're not going to get any committee assignment worth note. You'll end up being you'll be the parking lot chairman of the Congress or something, right? So you got to caucus with one or the other. And so the structure of our federal government and how it's run by two parties, I don't know how you change that with an independent, because in the end, we have two independents in the Senate, but they caucus with the Democrats. And so effectively, the Democrat Party or the Democrats there take care of their committee assignments and all of that. So that's probably the hardest part for Mr. Osborn. Any independent wants to run for Congress, he got asked repeatedly, who are you going to caucus with? And he never knew how to answer that, right? Because it's going to be one or the other. And he would say neither, or that was the hard part of his campaign, I think.
Well, he'd say neither, right? And your argument is if you say neither, then you have no power, right?
Right. Or you're going to be the chairman of the parking lot committee.
Right.
They'll make a new committee for you.
Right. And I got to let you go because you've had a busy week, but I want to ask you, before we lose you here, you're a voice that's rising. You're getting more support around the country by the day. You were on Face the Nation and everywhere nationally. I think people are looking to you to be a voice of reason in the Republican Party, especially if they want to attract independents, which they've had a harder and harder time doing. Is there a scenario where you'd run for president in 2028 to represent either a more moderate Republican voice or even as an independent?
First of all, I love my country, our country. I love what it's done. I love its history. I love what we stand for. And I believe that you have to work with people, even if you don't agree with them sometimes in another party. You got to find areas where you can work together. I read the Federalist Papers. That's the way they designed it. It was consensus building. They didn't want a party to totally shut out. They didn't use the word parties. They used factions in the Federalist Papers. But if you want this country to work, you've got to work across the aisle and find areas you agree on, because that's why we made a bicameral, separations of powers, checks and balances. And people forget that. They're like, that makes you a traitor somehow. But no, I want to govern, and I want us to solve things there. Now, I didn't plan on running for Congress in 2014 when I retired, but a series of events occurred where the incumbent lost, and I was the only one that I thought could win that was willing to run. And so I went from wanting to be a chairman of the local party to running for Congress, and I didn't see it coming, right? I am interested in national politics. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not in this position today, being a congressman from Omaha, to be able to do that effectively. There'd have to be a series of things that would occur where I could maybe serve at, in the executive branch as a Secretary of Defense, or there's got to be some things that would have to happen, I think, that would position me even better. But, that said, William McKinley was a congressman. It has happened, but it's hard to run for president as a congressman. I'll just say it that way. And I think probably a few other things would have to follow for me. It'd have to be divine, because this just doesn't happen. But I am interested in running. I would be interested in being a leader nationally in our country. I have a heart. I've been studying this since I was a teenager, and I love, and I don't know. I guess I have convictions. I see what effective presidents have done, like Eisenhower and Reagan, and that's who I want to be, right? So I guess God would have to open up the right doors for that to happen. But I do want to serve and make our country viable and strong for the decades to come. That's where my heart's at.
Well, that sounds like there's an opening. So I appreciate the fact that you're honest and you're candid and you hold the line. Can I ask you one more thing that's really important to our community that I have to get your thoughts on if I can, as a veteran, as someone on national security, as someone who's willing to buck your party? Thousands of veterans are being fired. We see now, 68,000 folks are going to be fired at the VA. A third of them will be veterans. Every time HHS says they're going to lay off 10,000 veterans, 10,000 people, 3,000 of them will be veterans, right? If roughly 1 in 3 are federal workers. Are you or anybody else in Congress working on a plan to provide an off-ramp for all those veterans? We spent 2 decades trying to improve veteran unemployment, and now they're getting laid off by the thousand. And it seems to be something specifically that's resonating with the American people. Do you have any thoughts on that specifically, or plans that veterans can look to for what happens next for so many veterans, which could be 100,000 veterans by the end of the year?
Well, I'm going to try to get the ground truth on this, because you read this, and then, so I went to RVA and I said, how many people got fired? And they wouldn't tell me. So then I had to go to the VA secretary, and I said, hey, they won't tell me. He says, well, you deserve an answer. I found the answer. It was 9. 9 people in our local VA got fired. So it tells me it's smaller than what it is, but I feel bad for the 9. I'm not trying to defend it. But I think the scope, at least in the VA, it's not as big as some of the reporting that's out there. Now, granted,
not yet, right? They said it's coming later at VA, right?
Well, it's got to be. One part of the Doge, I don't mind. I don't mind the auditing. Put it, show us what we're spending our money. But why are we cutting people without a lot of the analysis and the forethought? And then you got to go back and restore some of the firings. And I don't think that's right. I've said, let's be transparent, audit, but let's be very thoughtful about where we're letting people go. I think most of us think the bureaucracy is too big. But there's some of these things don't make sense. We're going to fire a bunch of people in Social Security agency, and I can't get a call back from these guys, right? I mean, the customer service Social Security agency is terrible right now. And so we got to so some of the stuff don't make sense. But in the end, if Congress has appropriated and the president has signed it, the president will lose every time in the courts. And unfortunately, it takes 2 or 3 months to get there. And Congress has the ability to stop some of the stuff, but it also takes 2 or 3 months to do. And it's really through the power of the purse. So none of this can stop on the dime once the president makes these decisions. And I know that's not very fulfilling. If you're on the other side of this, you don't like what's going on. But in the courts have been ruling consistently that the president has to follow the law. And that's why there's so much anger out there towards the courts right now. But they're just following the Constitution on this for the most part. There may be a few spurious things out there that maybe I'd even disagree with. But bottom line is, they're saying if you appropriate money and the president signed it, the president's got to execute that. There's no off ramp, and the courts are consistently ruling, and they're really defending Article 1 by doing this. And some of my colleagues miss that. They think it's Article 3 versus Article 2. No, more often than not, the Article 3 guys are defending Article 1 against Article 2. And that's been a winning argument.
Well, you have been outspoken in defending the Constitution, defending values, defending civility in a way that I think is really important. We talk a lot in this show about how our kids need leaders they can look up to, leaders who have moral clarity, leaders who can set an example. And especially as a veteran, as a father, as a grandfather, we appreciate your leadership, your courage. You're catching a lot of heat from your own party and from all sides, which probably means you're doing something right. But we've talked on this show about how Nebraska has something special cooking, and you're a Republican who's won in a district that's gone to Democrats the last 2 times, and you're getting a lot of, I think, support and attention, as you should, because you're rising to this moment. So
I couldn't have won without 11,000 Harris voters. They crossed over. Even more. There's probably even more Osborn voters that switched over for me. So in our district, you got to be able to appeal to the middle to win.
Well, I think that's key to the country. I think your district and your race and the support for your voice is an insight into where most of the country is. We talk about it a lot of time that most of this country is independent and they're looking for independent voices like you. So I still hope you'll leave the Republican Party and declare your independence. But in the meantime, we really appreciate your leadership. I hope you'll come back on the show.
Thank you.
And Nebraska is where it's at. Even the Huskers football team is looking strong lately. So we're going to keep an eye on Nebraska, and we appreciate your leadership and support, especially on Ukraine and so many important issues. Representative Don Bacon, thank you so much for joining us. Stay vigilant.
Bye-bye. Thank you, sir.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Representative Don Bacon. If you did, let me know, sound off, and share. I hope you're watching us on YouTube. If you're not, please go and do that. And I hope you're connecting with us on social media, where I always ask you to look for the helpers. I'm leaving now the site of Ground Zero and the World Trade Center Memorial. No better symbol for what it means to be a helper. And just north of here are some ball fields that'll be filled with little leaguers and kids playing sports throughout the next couple of weeks and the next couple of months. And it's a time for helpers. It's a time for coaches, because Little League is back. Spring sports are back, and there's only a couple months left in the school year. And all across America, coaches are stepping up to mentor young men and women, to teach them how to be leaders, teach them how to be helpers, and also teach them how to be friends. It's one of the great things that coaches do, is teach kids how to be kind to each other, how to be supportive of each other, and how to be teammates. And there's no greater team sport than America. And we saw that this week as March Madness came to a spectacular close, as the Florida Gators showed what teamwork is really all about. And maybe the best example of leadership, teamwork, and unity coming together as one was the inspiring, fantastic, role model driven victory and national championship by the UConn women's basketball team and their spectacular leader, Paige Beckers, who is my favorite player in America to watch this year. And after their monumental victory, Paige Beckers talked about why this team was so special.
I saw on social media they were saying UConn won based on the power of friendship. It's so accurate, just how much we love each other, how much we're connected, how much we've been through as individuals, as a team, and how much it's bonded us and helped us become national champions.
UConn won thanks to the power of friendship. And a couple of you won as well. So I want to congratulate the winners of our first annual Independent Americans March Madness bracket. And the winner of all people, my friend Jay LaMonica. I want to congratulate Jay LaMonica, Steven Schlachter, and Eric Rifkin. You are a top 3. Congratulations. You got something special coming from me and Independent Americans soon. Jay's a buddy of mine and fellow coach and won our whole pool. So congratulations to Jay and to all of you that played. I hope you enjoyed March Madness half as much as I did. So spring is almost here. The cherry blossoms are out. Construction crews are unfortunately out too. And the NBA playoffs are almost here. I also want to send a big thanks to all our Patreon members, the vigilant, the very vigilant, the most vigilant. If you're not a Patreon member, go ahead to independentamericans.us now and check it out. You can also get lots of gear, and you can sign up for our newsletter. And next year, you can register for our March Madness tournament, and maybe you'll be the winner. Be sure to hit us up on social media, and you can call us on this phone line. And as I head back south with the World Trade Center behind me, past the playgrounds and ball fields, I want to leave you with a couple of quick Reichoff's recommendations. Recommendation number 1. Check out The Last of Us. If you haven't seen it on Max, it's absolutely awesome. The post-apocalyptic show that blew my mind and is a great distraction if you need one. The first season I am almost done with, and the new season is coming up. If you need an escape, a riveting, dramatic, emotional gut check of a show, check out The Last of Us. And this is a non-recommendation. Do not bother with White Lotus. I really have high hopes for White Lotus every single time. It's kind of like presidential politics. You always have high hopes for a president, and they always let you down. And that's what White Lotus did for me. So season 3 starts great, good cast, ends with a flop. Save your time. Go watch The Last of Us or 1923 instead. Or this week, check out the new season of The Handmaid's Tale, which is back and absolutely amazing. Every season has been amazing. I'm sure this one will be the same. Lastly, a couple weeks ago, we lost legendary actor Val Kilmer, who has been memorialized in lots of different ways. But throughout this last couple of weeks and throughout this show, we've talked a lot about friendship. And in times like this, when times are hard, friendship is especially important. And Val Kilmer was in one of my favorite movies of all time, Tombstone, which is, of course, a film about cowboys. It's about Wyatt Earp. It's about the Wild West. It's about a town called Tombstone. But at its core, it's about something very, very sacred. It's about brotherhood. It's about honor. And it's about friendship.
What the hell are you doing this for anyway?
Wyatt Earp is my friend.
Yeah, well, I got lots of friends.
I don't.
So pour one out for Val Kilmer this week. And pour one out for a friend you've lost or a friend you miss. And remember that friendship is that tie that binds, and we can all do a better job of reaching out to our friends, especially in times like this. And remember, friends, you're not alone in your independence or your vigilance. We're all vigilant, and we're all in this together. And if you're especially a part of the 50% of Americans who are independent, this is your show, this is your community, and this is a place where you will find friends. Light over heat, country over party, people over politics, challenging the status quo and building a new movement. And stay vigilant, my friend, because eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. And hope is the oxygen of democracy. And hope springs eternal, especially this time of year. And stay vigilant, my friends. And know you're not alone in your vigilance. We're all vigilant. And we're all in this together. I'm your host, Paul Reichoff. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for walking with me. Until next time, down with Hamas, down with Putin, Slava Ukraine, and stay vigilant, America. And hang in there. Spring is coming at some point. I promise.
Powered by Righteous Media.